Okay, let's get into this. All right, what is up, everybody? I am Taylor. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back, or whatever. If this is our first time seeing me, thank you for stopping by. If you're repeat viewers, thank you a lot for viewing more than one of my vids. I appreciate it. Today I wanted to talk to you a bit about Cages by Dave McKean. Oh, look, I got glare and everything going on because I am a pro, people. This... Folks have asked me for a while to talk about some of my favorite comics because I sometimes have this reputation of being, I don't know, cranky. It might have something to do with the fact that I call my weekly comic book reviews cranky comic book reviews. I'm not sure. That could be a reason. I doubt it. I don't know. I don't see how there's any correlation between that. But I'm fairly critical of books. I don't tend to love a ton, but when I do like books, I really, really like them. And this is one of my favorite comic books of all time. It's Cages by Dave McKean. I already mentioned that, but let's get into this. Cages. First of all, sorry. Back it up a little bit. I'm not going to edit this out. I don't edit. I'm bad at all this crap. If you want to buy this book, I think it's out of print, but I'm going to leave it a link down below to Amazon. I know Amazon's the devil. They're the big corporate overlords. They're taking over the world. They're ruining everything. That's all true. But sometimes they also have books and stuff you can't find anywhere else. I'm going to leave a link down there below. It's an affiliate link, so if you buy the book from there, I make like 4 cents. Just a heads up on that. I also am starting a Substack, and that's a newsletter where I write reviews and stuff and things about comics and everything else. It's free. I'm going to leave a link for that down below. So if you want to join and sign up, it'll be great. I'm going to have an article about Cages on there that'll probably, hopefully, be a little less rambly than this video, because that I'll actually edit and go through and spell check and stuff and things and whatnot. But so give me a follow in there, and I appreciate it. At some point down the line, I might do something where I turn into have a monetized tier on there where I do mystery boxes and original art and all that. But for now, all free. You can read my articles, you can slam me, you can follow along, you can do whatever you want. Substack, Amazon. I touched on that. Now, a little bit about Dave McKean. He, I don't know, he's British. So, there you have it. He's probably best known for his collaborations with Neil Gaiman. He did all this covers to the original run of Sandman, all 75 issues. They worked on a book called Violent Cases together, and Signal to Noise, and what else? The Day I Swapped My Dad for 2 Goldfish, a film called Miramax, all sorts of other stuff. He also worked with Grant Morrison on Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth, which turns out Grant and Dave hated each other and didn't want to do it. That's a different story for a different day. But yeah, Dave's a ridiculously talented individual. He's an artist. He's a musician. He's worked on many album covers for folks. He's directed 3 movies. It's just infuriating, right? And no one person should be that talented. You got to split it up into like 7 people, and then they can each have a little bit of talent. But one person being that talented, it's just frustrating for the rest of us mere humans. But yeah, so that's Dave in a brief nutshell. I first came across this book in probably about 1998. It was originally published by Tundra and then Kitchen Sink as like these single issue, oversized, kind of hard to find issues. And then they were collected by Kitchen Sink in 98 into the volume. And this is probably that volume from then. I think I had 2 copies that I bought at one time. They are, one I still have, the other one I think got destroyed somewhere along the lines. Along the way. This is beat to hell. It's nowhere near mint copy. It's well read. I pick it up every few years and I read through it again because I think it's one of those books that's worth a reread. So I reread it. And that's why I dug it out and I'm like, you know what? I should talk about this. So yeah, it's Cages by Dave McKean. There you have it. I'm done. Now, the book starts with, an intro by Terry Gilliam that I don't think I've ever read. Once you get past that, it starts with these creation myths and parables that Dave wrote. And there's several of them. And they're like in what you might know of as a typical Dave McKean-ish kind of style. They're like photographs or collage or photoshopped, and it's prose. So you're starting this book with a fairly dense amount of prose for a comic. For a real book, quote unquote, not so much. I mean, we're talking like 15 pages. And then it goes into the actual plot of the comic. And the plot ostensibly is about this artist named Leo who moves to an apartment building uh, to start over and sort of like refresh his creative process because he's having a creative block, and so he moved to a new studio, and then it's about the interactions with the inhabitants of that apartment building and the neighborhood. And there's other characters that you meet along the way. There's a jazz musician who might or might not be a god figure in this book, a kind of all-knowing figure. There's a hapless caretaker who doesn't remember and gets his names wrong. There's a burgeoning relationship with a woman named Karen that's in here. And then there's also a widow who's lost her husband and refuses to acknowledge he's dead. And that's a sad, poignant little bit in there. And then, there's also a bit about an artist named Jonathan Rush who happened to write a novel named Cages. Look, it's all meta, people. It all interweaves and ties together. But that artist is also kind of a stand-in for Salman Rushdie. And that's of the era. I mean, Salman Rushdie wrote a book in 1988, I think, 89, called The Satanic Verses, and had a fatwa placed on him by the Islamics, by a certain sect of Muslimism, and they've called for his death. And so it's still in place as near as I can tell. I think Salman Rushdie's still alive. I didn't do a lot of research, but yeah, it's a stand-in of the era. I mean, who would ever censor books nowadays and like refuse not let kids learn things and ban books in schools and teach, especially history or things like that and things that would spark the mind? It would never happen in today's society, right? But yeah, it's plot-wise, it's not the most plot-driven book. It is mostly about these character interactions and how like Leo kind of weaves in and out of their lives. And then there's also bits where it doesn't involve Leo at all, where it talks about this widow and stuff. And it's a meandering book as far as that goes, and it's fairly large and meandering. I think we're almost 500 pages, 496 pages of meandering, kind of loosely woven together plot that doesn't have much of a plot. So what's appealing about it? We'll get to that in a minute. But the art is mostly these two-color ink drawings, mostly, that I really like. It's on a 9-panel grid, a lot different than Neil's Sandman covers and everything else that I touched on. It's a quick gestural, fluid line that he has. Really great at capturing characters, abstracted a bit too, and so it's not like super representational. It's easy enough to see possibly yourself in some of these. I mean, you can distinctly recognize each of the characters in here. It's not anything like that. And the grid doesn't feel limiting because he also breaks it whenever he feels the need. Goes a bit more abstract. And there are pieces and chunks in here where he'll have painterly bits and photographs and collages and everything else that like sort of are his staccato points. They emphasize like a slowing down of time or a change or, speeding up, just forcing you to like consider the book a bit differently. He plays around with the medium of comics in a very nice way as far as that goes. There are bits that are just single color. There are like full color in very few places in here. Let's see if I can find one. I should have bookmarked this, but I didn't because I just decided to start filming and recording and whatever. There's full color bits in here. There are painterly bits. There's a variety of styles. There we go. Full on. Collage-y, Photoshop-y, with some prose elements in there as well. Yeah, he's a talented guy. Like and I think that for the most part, the stylistic changes that he brings about work for the story, in the service of the story. I appreciate the fact, and he's spoken about this in interviews, that he wanted to do a looser style that he did for, say, Arkham Asylum or any of the other books that he collaborated on Neil with, because he thought that some of the more painterly, photographic-y, chunky stuff he did before kind of slowed down the storytelling and kind of got in the way of telling an actual tale. He thought that this fluid line work and this quick gestural art let him tell a more expressive tale, and I tend to agree with him. I think it does flow pretty quickly, and while it is a 500-page book and it does have some prose stuff in it, it's not an overly dense, hard to read book. I mean, there's dialogue, there's it's not the quickest read either. I mean, there are bits in here that take some time to go through. As far as the writing goes, it does meander, it does wander, it does study and linger on characters, and and each not every character gets its moment to shine in the book, but the ones that do, I think he does an effective job with like telling their little bits of stories, and that's sometimes what it is. It's bits of stories. It's not the most completed tales, and not everything gets all wrapped up in a neat little bow, and not everything resolves. The things that do, you're like, oh, that's awesome, or you're like, oh, that hurts, or that's you have an emotional reaction, and there are some satisfying mini finishing points in here, but there are loose threads, and there's characters you're like, oh, I wish we would have learned more about that person or that individual. But it just is kind of like life. Like folks just kind of wander in and out, and you're not always left with a satisfying resolution to everything. So yeah, it's a free form but structured is how I wrote it in my notes. I think it does kind of remind me of listening to jazz. Like there's an underlying like sense of like knowing how to put together a book, of knowing how to structure these things, and then just playing with it, improv and messing around, like knowing where you want the thing to end up and where you want it to begin, and just kind of meandering in the middle. I think that's a bit of what Dave was doing in here. I could be wrong. It could all be very intricate and very thought out and ahead of time, and every little bit in here could have been plotted. I've never met the man. I've never had a chance to ask for that, but I have a feeling he kind of pulled some improv in here and just kind of like went with his gut and told the story that way, which I think is an interesting way to do it. And what do I think of this? Well, let's see here. We'll get to that in a little bit further down the line. Keep watching. There's themes that he does tie on. Like creation is a big one. Obviously, there's creation myths in the beginning. There's an artist struggling to create. There's a writer that has created. There's also other characters that have like created their own little worlds. And then that ties into the CAGES name of the book, which is also the name of a book written by an author in here. Like I said, meta. It's the mental and sometimes physical cages that people build for themselves. The writer's block, artist block, the struggle to create, the struggle to change, and the idea that you're trapped in a life that you've made, or feel trapped, or inability to escape situations. He dives into a lot of that in here, and there's like cycles that kind of like run their way through it of like rebirth and recreation and endings and beginnings, and it tumbles its way through with these thoughts and stuff. There's a lot of this is kind of open to interpretation. That's what I get out of the book. Your mileage may vary. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's a cat. There's a cat in here that's a main character that doesn't have a word of dialogue, mostly. And, well, a little bit. I lied. There's something, the cat actually has some dialogue. Spoilers. Yeah. And I don't love cats generally, but the cats tend to, in this book, are pretty effectively handled. And, yeah, the sense of time and like time and its effects on people also are played with here. And the book does go forwards and backwards in time a little bit in really pretty interesting ways. But also there's characters that like he doesn't necessarily like follow them through their entire life, but it's just the toll of like time that time has taken on them that he touches upon. So I mean, and there's others in here that I could probably expound upon. And I think like every time I reread this, I get something new out of it, which I think you really want out of a book. I think it's in order for something to hold your interest, if you're one and done on something, I don't think it's going to be considered great necessarily. It could be fun, could be awesome, could be a popcorn comic, and that's all fantastic, and I love those as well. But this book is one of my favorites because I keep coming back to it. Because every time I pick it up, I'm like, oh, that is something new. And because I just marvel at sort of the ease at which he draws these figures and like has these casual moments, and the ease at which like he's managed to like tell this meandering story. It does kind of frustrate me, and it does kind of drive me a little nuts that I'm like, I'll never be able to do anything like this, or I'll never be able to accomplish stuff like that. And then there's that self-doubt, and then the creation, and it goes into the creation, and the self-doubt, and it's all a cycle, and you want to break free from the cycle and make something. I usually end up pretty inspired by this book after I finish a reread. and I also like sit and think about it for a bit, because the part of the nature of this is like not everything is wrapped up in a neat bow, and because it is such a large tome, that there's enough room in here for him to squeeze some pretty interesting ideas and some stuff that like you can linger on different things he's saying, and I think that's awesome. As far as criticisms go, I don't have a ton. I do think some of the collagey, photoshoppy bits, I don't think they necessarily all age super well. So that's just a mind. Like, and sorry, I got a microphone blocking some of that, and I don't think necessarily the heavily painter bits or the photography bits always age well either. Like this one, like it's just the nature of the technology that existed at the time that he made it, I think. And some of the painterly collage stuff that's not super present in here generally, but are on the covers and stuff, it just feels like it's a 90s book. It sort of screams like, oh, I listened to some like Nine Inch Nails' third album while I put this together. Like that kind of stuff. But that's pretty nitpicky, and it's nothing that like should detract anybody from reading this. Otherwise, there's a couple characters in here where he, dialogue-wise, adds like a Jamaican accent and other accents to their dialogue, and I don't think that ages particularly well either. It tends to be characters of color, and it doesn't ring super true, and it kind of like has a little bit of a false note to it. Again, your mileage may vary on this. I don't love those bits. I like what the characters are saying, and I like that the characters are pretty interesting characters, even in spite of that, but I just don't think that dialogue treatment is fantastic. And that's the other big nitpick I have with this. It's not a major complaint. It's just something it kind of like rings false to my ears every time I read it, if that makes any kind of sense. So yeah, other than that, like I think it's a fantastic book. If you're looking for something that is not your typical comic, that you want a challenge, you want something that does linger with you and something that does stick with you a bit, I highly recommend Cages. It is one of my favorite comic books of all time. I don't really know what else to say. I don't want to keep you guys forever. But yeah, please do check out my Substack. I'll probably go into a little more depth in some things there, and hopefully be a little bit more concise in other areas. If you want to buy the book, again, there'll be an Amazon link down below where you can like pick it up. It'll be a different looking cover than this. This cover's out of print for sure, and I think there's a softbound and a hardbound on there the last time I looked. So I'll link to one of them, and if you like it, pick it up. I think it's worth finding. Hit your LCS up first and see if they happen to have it. The single back issues are pretty tricky to find. They might have a collected version there, and obviously support them first. But if you can't find it there and you want to throw me a couple, like pennies and stuff by buying it through the affiliate link through the Devil Amazon, there you go. Yeah, that's all I've got, really. I'm gonna probably page through this book a few more times and try and get this video up sometime this week, whenever that is. I'm not gonna tell you, because if I don't, then I really am a failure. But yeah, thank you again. Check out the Substack. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell. I'll be dropping more content like this. I'm kind of sick of the mystery box stuff, so I probably won't be opening a ton of them in the future. So I'll be doing more review kind of things because it just holds my interest more. It may not be for every viewer, but that's okay. It's not. I don't necessarily make these. Well, I make these for you guys, but I also make them for me, and that's my channel. And I do what I want. I create it because I can't help it. Actually, those that can't critique, whatever. Don't be a dick, even if you're just critiquing a book. All right, I'll see you next time. Thank you. And look at this hair. Holy crap. I don't know what I'm doing.